Today you're going to be listening to chapter 19. And again, I think there are only two words that you might not be familiar with. The first word is ragged. So if something is ragged, it might not be as fresh as it once was. It might be a little rough around the edges. So I think about my things that are ragged. My favorite books are ragged because I've read them many times. And so the corners of the pages might be dog-eared because I've turned them down over the years. And I think about some of my boys' toys that are a little ragged. They're well loved. And the other word you might not be familiar with is wept, and it's another word for cry. And usually when someone weeps, it's almost like a silent cry. While you're reading this chapter, I want you to think about whether or not it's possible for two people to love someone but show their love very differently. Is it still love if it doesn't look the same? Think about that as you're listening to this chapter.
Hello class, my name is Kothai and I'm very happy to be reading to you chapter 19. The days passed, the sun rose and set and rose and set again and again. Sometimes the father came home and sometimes he did not. Edward's ears became soggy and he did not care. His sweater had almost completely unraveled and it didn't bother him. He was hugged half to death, and it felt good. In the evenings, at the hands of Bryce, at the ends of the twine, Edward danced and danced. 1 month passed, and then 2, and then 3. Sarah Ruth got worse. In the 5th month, she refused to eat. And in the 6th month, she began to cough up blood. Her breathing became ragged and uncertain, as if she was trying to remember, in between breaths, what to do, what breathing was. "Breathe, honey," Bryce stood over her and said. "Breathe," thought Edward from deep inside the well of her arms. "Please, please, breathe." Bryce stopped leaving the house. He sat at home all day and held Sarah Ruth in his lap and rocked her back and forth and sang to her. On a bright morning in September, Sarah Ruth stopped breathing. "Oh no," said Bryce. "Oh honey, take a little breath, please." Edward had fallen out of Sarah Ruth's arms the night before, and she had not asked for him again. So, face down on the floor, arms over his head, Edward listened as Bryce wept. He listened as the father came home and shouted at Bryce. He listened as the father wept. "You can't cry," Bryce shouted. "You got no right to cry. You never even loved her. You don't know nothing about love." "I loved her," said the father. "I loved her." "I loved her too," thought Edward. "I loved her, and now she is gone. How could this be?" he wondered. How could he bear to live in a world without Sarah Ruth? The yelling between the father and son continued, and then there was a terrible moment when the father insisted that Sarah Ruth belonged to him, that she was his girl, his baby, and that he was taking her to be buried. "She ain't yours," Bryce screamed. "You can't take her. She ain't yours." But the father was bigger and stronger, and he prevailed. He wrapped Sarah Ruth in a blanket and carried her away. The small house became very quiet. Edward could hear Bryce moving around, muttering to himself. And then, finally, the boy picked Edward up. "Come on, Jangles," Bryce said. "We're leaving. We're going to Memphis." Thank you.
I hope you've enjoyed the latest chapter in the Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane by Kate DiCamillo. Click on the links in the description of this video to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Y2K Teacher, HRCE, or to check out my website with more exciting resources. These chapters have been read to you by members of the Bedford, Nova Scotia community. These community members have been brought together through the Talk Bedford Facebook group.